Alright, so let's talk about what we know about congruent triangles. Based on our definition of congruent, congruent things are exactly the same size and shape. That's the same for congruent triangles. They're the same size and shape. Now, what does that mean? Well, to get the same shape, the corresponding angles have to be congruent. Okay, so the corresponding angles are congruent. To get the same size, the corresponding sides have to be congruent. Now, remember, sometimes people get this mixed up. Angles are the corners, okay, the openings in the corner. The sides are the lines, the segments that make up the triangle. So when we talk about corresponding angles are congruent, we mean the angles in the same place in the figure are congruent. So as we have down here, angle C would be congruent to angle L. Angle B would be congruent to angle M, as they're marked there. And angle A would have to be congruent to angle N. So in order for those two triangles to be congruent, that is the case. Our corresponding sides are also congruent. So what does that mean? Well, notice we have one hash mark here and one hash mark here. The line from C to B is congruent to the line from L to M. Notice they're in the same position in the triangle, and we have that marked down here. AB has to be congruent to NM. Okay, so where's AB? Here's the line from A to B. Its corresponding part, the line from N to M, are congruent, as we can tell by the two hash marks they've marked there. And finally, the last pair of lines also, CA, so the side that goes from C to A, would have to be congruent to the side that goes from L to N. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that's when we say congruent triangles, that's what we know. The angles are congruent and the sides are congruent for the two triangles. Polygons are the same way. Remember, polygon is any figure with, this is the wrong lesson label here, are any two figures that have, is a figure that has multiple sides, more than two sides, excuse me. So notice we have pictures of two congruent polygons. If polygons are congruent, their corresponding angles are congruent, just like we had with triangles. Their corresponding sides are congruent, just like we had with congruent triangles. And here you can see that the parts are matched up. CB, where is he? CB and LM were congruent. AB and NM, FA and PN, and then off screen there, about that, FC and PL are congruent. And also our angles, we've matched up the corresponding angles. They should be exactly same size. So C and L, B and M, A and N, and F and P. Okay, now if we were to write down the names of these two polygons, we would name the vertices in order. So CBAF would be my first one. Is congruent to, now the first one you can name in any order you want, but when you name the second one, you have to match up the corresponding parts. So notice C came first in the name, so when I write down the second one, I would want to write down L, because that's the part that corresponds to it. B came second in the name, it corresponds to M, so M would have to come second in this one's name. Next I had A. Here's A, its corresponding part was N, so N would come next. And finally the remaining one, P. This is also a good way, if they just give you the names of two congruent figures, an easy way to match up corresponding angles and sides. For example, if they said BA, what does it correspond to? Well, B and A are the two middle letters here. It should correspond to the two middle letters here, and as you see, it does. BA and MN are two congruent parts. If they said angle F, what's angle F congruent to? Without even looking at the picture, it should be congruent to angle P, because they both came last in the name. So that's one benefit. It can help you match up corresponding parts without even seeing a picture of the figure, okay, because the letters should go in the same order as their congruent parts. With that, here is an example of that exactly. If polygon STVD is congruent to LMPQ. Name the pairs of corresponding congruent parts. Okay, so here's our two names, STVD. And again, the order is very important, so I don't want to change the order from that they gave me. So remember, we have two things that we match up. We have corresponding sides and we have corresponding angles. Okay, so we want to match up those that correspond. So here, let's start. Angle S from this figure would have to be congruent to angle what? Well, S came first in this one's name, so it must correspond to the first letter in this name, L. Angle T should be congruent to what? Well, angle T was second in this one's name. It should correspond to the second in this one's name, which was M. Angle V, so if we just continue that, you can see kind of the pattern we're using here. The third letter in this name corresponds to the third letter in this name, and angle D. And that's a rule that has to be followed when you're naming congruent figures. You have to line up the corresponding parts. For sides, remember sides are line segments, so they have two letters in their name. Okay, so let's take the first two letters. This would be a side of this figure. ST would have to be congruent to the side named by naming the first two letters in this figure, LM. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and erase that so we can go to the next. Okay, so here's my next two letters in this name, TV. So TV are the two middle letters. It should correspond to the side made up the two middle letters of this name, MP. Okay, so the line from T to V should be congruent to the line from M to P. Well, let's go to our next. Okay, our next pair would be the line from V to D. Should be congruent to, see, it's the last two letters in the name, from P to Q. Now I have to, except for the beginning and end letter, they have to be letters that are next to one another. So notice this has 4 letters. It should have 4 sides, and right now I have 3 sides listed. That last side will be the first letter and the last letter, because notice if I had a 4-sided figure and named it STVD in that appropriate order, we have ST, TV, VD, and then notice that last side is connecting the first and last letter. So my final side is SD, and it should correspond to the first letter in this name, L, the first letter in this name, Q. Okay, so that's one way you could do this, or you could draw the figures yourself and label them. You just want to be really careful that you start and stay in the order they're listed. So STVD, make sure you start this one L, the same place you had the S, and that you stay, don't skip back and forth, just go in a circle around the figure, don't flop back and forth. And notice our parts do match up. So SD was the top here, went with LM the top here. Okay, TV was the right side of this one, matched up with NP just like we said it would. DV the bottom matched up with QP just like we said, and SD the left side matched up with LQ just like we said. And notice our angles match up also. S to L, T to M, V to P, and D to Q. Okay, so those are 2 ways you could do it. You can draw a figure, or you can just look at the order of the letters in the name and match them up. Okay, so here is another one that you can try out. Let's try this one using, so we had LMNP, it says, is congruent to EFGH. There are 4 letters, which means we have a 4-sided figure. So let's try this one instead by drawing a picture. So we try out both methods. Okay, so L, M, N, P. Now notice, very important, I started at this corner and went in a circle around the figure. I didn't go right, left, or excuse me, left, right, left, right. You have to go in order around the figure. Now let's draw its corresponding congruent figure. I'll do my best to draw one that looks exactly the same. Start in the same place. So my first letter L was the top left-hand corner. This first letter E should be in that same place. They're corresponding. and then go the same direction. I went to the right as I wrote my name down. I'm going to go to the right. Okay, let's match up our corresponding parts. So again, we have sides that are congruent, and we have angles that are congruent. Let's start with the sides this time. So here's my first one, from L to M. Should be congruent to, that's my top here, should be congruent from E to F. The right-hand side, MN, should go with FG. The bottom here, PN, should go with the bottom here, HG. And one more, our left side, LP, should go with our left side, EH. Okay, and now let's match up the angles. So the top left-hand angle, angle L, should be congruent to the top left-hand angle here, angle E. M, our top right-hand angle, should match up with our top right-hand angle here, and notice these are in the same, that's F. Notice they're facing the same direction. If they face them opposite directions, you want to just be careful. Make sure you match up the parts that look the same. And finally, angle P goes with angle H. Okay? Now you're not going to be asked to name that many parts, but just so you can see how to match them up. Again, you can do it by order in their name, or you can draw the figures. Just be really careful when you're labeling them. Draw the figures and do it that way.